Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so proud to be participating in the Mandalorian panel. We have with us Jon Favreau, creator and executive producer, Dave Filoni, executive producer, and Ludwig Göransson, composer from The Mandalorian. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, we should say The Mandalorian came in, the force is strong with this one, with 15 nominations, including Outstanding Drama Series. We're going to talk about a lot of things, and of course, we're going to talk about a certain little mini member of the Force, the Jedi to be, perhaps. But before we do that, we're going to look at a clip from The Mandalorian, and you will see someone special. Take a look at this.
Anyone else?
The tracking fob is still active. My sensors indicate that there is a life form present.
Wait, they said 50 years old.
Species age differently. Perhaps it could live many centuries. Sadly, we'll never know.
No. We'll bring it in alive.
The commission was quite specific. The asset was to be terminated.
There we have it, Baby Yoda. Jon, I have to ask you guys right off the top, because Baby Yoda has become a cultural phenomenon. Where did the idea for that character come from, and how did you and your team bring this beloved member of the Star Wars community to life?
Well, it was a real group effort. At first, when I wrote that script, I put in that there was a baby of the Yoda species in a pram. And the hook was that you thought he was going after somebody who was 50 years old, so you're expecting a human character that was older, but to see that he was a baby, it was a turning point for the character from story perspective. Then that last image that we had, by the way, Dave directed that episode. Dave had done a sketch of the of that, that kind of Michelangelo E.T. moment, and that was a source of inspiration. Then Doug Chang and the whole art department started generating drawings of it, and then the legacy people built it. So it started with an idea that was just written on the page, but it evolved into the character that you see through the efforts of all of the talented people working on the show. And that's part of the reason I'm so proud that the show's been recognized for all the different craftspeople that work on the show, because they really do a lot of what people love about the show is about the artists and the crew that work really hard and bring a lot of talent to it.
Totally. I mean, you guys have nominations for production design and many things. Of course, Ludwig, you're nominated for your music. And I want to talk about that in this opening scene in particular, because the music in The Mandalorian is in many ways a character itself. Like Star Wars and its iconic music, you set the tone, you bring the drama. Can you give us a sense of what was some of the things that you and Jon discussed and you and Dave discussed when you started putting together the musical cues you wanted for the series? And what were some of the biggest challenges for you as a musician and composer?
It's a good question, because one of the big challenges was actually what we just saw with the baby. Because naturally, when I first saw that moment, I wanted to write something that was kind of in maybe something more like baby-like and cute-like and magical. But we had a lot of conversations before every meeting and every sponsor. We talked just about what we're trying to do here, and essentially, we're all the music is coming out of Mando's perspective. He has a helmet on. He doesn't have, so you don't see his face, you don't see facial expression. So what we did is that the music always tells the story of Mando's perspective. So even though you see this incredible cute baby, the music is playing what Mando's experiencing, and that's kind of what we focused the whole show around, to just tell Mando's story through the music.
For you as a composer, working on a whole series or 8 episodes like this, what are some of the emotional arcs for you as you bring in new characters? Do you write new theme songs for new characters? Obviously, we have reprises where certain music comes back. How do you structure it over an 8 episode run like this?
Well, I got started very early. Like I had my first meeting with John like 6 months before they started shooting the show. So I came into the office. And it's on the walls, on every wall. So it was just art direction and pictures and paintings from the show. So I read the scripts. I looked at the art direction and had a conversation with John and David and John David, and we were just got a really good head start of what to do. So I started going to my studio and just writing songs. I wrote 5-minute songs with just all bunch of different themes and different instrumentations. And what it started with was the recorder is a flute instrument, that everyone starts playing when they're 6 or 7 years old.
Show them the recorder. You have it there, right?
Yeah, it's right here.
We have props. That's what I'm talking about.
I bought this instrument. I bought a set of recorder because I knew I want to go into the studio and I wanted to play instruments. Because when I saw Star Wars for the first time and when I heard the music, I was 7, 8 years old, and I just remember that feeling it had, and I kind of wanted to recreate that feeling. And for some reason, I gravitated to this instrument that I used to play as a kid. So I was just going to the studio and just playing around away from the computer and just playing around with instruments that I could touch, like piano.
So you decided to go analog in many ways here and stay away from digital.
Yeah, exactly. Then, because I knew if we just nailed the themes and got the melodies and the sound right, like the production is easy. We can add. We talked about adding a tech element and making it modern, but I know that was going to be easy. That's like the easy part of it. So just getting the heart and the soul right from the beginning with the themes was just kind of crucial. So that's what this came out. And the first thing we started with was this. So that was kind of the first thing
Beautiful
I did for the show. And in the beginning I was like, oh, this is too simple. This is not going to work for Star Wars, which is like the most incredible, like complicated harmonically and theoretical music ever. So, but we added some modern production sounds to it. And I actually came to set when they were just starting to shoot, and I had this little melody on my iPhone. And I went down the elevator. This was actually in the elevator when I played it the first time for John and Dave. And I took out my cell phone and was like, hey guys, listen to this. And after like 2 seconds, John and Dave was like, that's it. That's the theme of the show.
And if you remember, we ran down to, Bryce was filming on one of the stages.
Yeah.
And we ran over to Bryce, who was directing. And it was the scene when Mando and Cara Dune are raiding in her episode in 104, and we played it for her and everybody gathered around this little phone with these little tiny speakers, and everybody lit up. And it was great to have the music on the set to make available to the directors, because it helped inspire the rhythm of the shoot. And when you have all these different directors, it's great to have things that unify the vision and unify the tone, and that music is certainly really helpful in that regard. Well,
John, I mean, you obviously with the live action version of Lion King, but specifically, I remember being so impressed when you and Robert did Iron Man 2, and you had a full AC/DC soundtrack, because it really did give that. But it gave, as you said, I mean, a unifying sense to this. Music has always been so important to you in your film and
Always.
films and other projects. What do you think? You talked about it a little bit here, but what do you think it does for the viewer, especially when you're coming to, as Ludwig said, you're walking into the iconic canon of Star Wars, where, you know, one note of at least 5 different songs sets off a zillion emotional reactions.
That's right.
What were the stakes like here for you with the music?
Well, Dave and I talked a lot about it because Dave's been involved with Star Wars through the Clone Wars for over a decade. And we discussed a lot of how do you use music, because music is probably, despite the fact that there are so many great stories and so many great visual effects in the Star Wars saga, I think music still stands as probably the most identifiable aspect of that whole series of films. And it's so identifiable, and it cuts deep into your memory so deeply that it could push everything else out of the way and be distracting. And so how would we balance not having the most iconic aspect of Star Wars in it, but also do something unique, but also that felt akin to it? And music, as you point out, it's the quickest way to create an emotional path with the audience to the story. You know, you have visual imagery, but visual imagery can be interpreted subjectively by everybody watching. The minute you lay music on, it starts to tune everybody together. You start to share this communal experience. And, you know, I come from movies, and movies is clearly a communal experience because you're all sitting in a theater, in a dark room, looking at a big image on a screen together at the same time. What's been interesting about this is how communal the experience has been through the streaming service, because everybody's watching at home and then talking to each other during it. And so that communal experience, and also having people who are watching it creating either their own reactions or their own memes or their own little videos, and then laying that music over it, has created this really interesting flow creatively through social media and the digital world that I've never encountered before. And that theme sort of is the thing that kind of hips you to that it's connected. So it's a very interesting moment that we're in right now. And I'm very grateful to be a part of a show like this, where everything is so fractured and everybody's looking at different, there's content for every individual. I love that there's a lot of people from different generations, old Star Wars fans, new Star Wars fans, parents, kids. Everybody seems to find something that they connect with here. And I love that communal experience of bringing people together.
I think it's very interesting you talk about it in that way, talking from your cinema background, because I think that's very true. I mean, one of the greatest moments I had watching A Mandalorian, I think it was about episode 3 or so, my nephew was over and we were watching it. And my nephew knows a little bit about Star Wars, because Star Wars is obviously part of our cultural lexicon. But you watched his face as he got into this. This was new for him. This was like us in 1977. And that was amazing to see that a piece of intellectual property has such strength and then is brought anew to the small screen. And I want to say, because John, you mentioned this, Dave, you've had an incredibly long history with Star Wars as a franchise, a decade with the Clone Wars, but this was your first foray into live action. Now, we should say, of course, except for a certain special many, many years ago, a certain Battle of Endor special, this is the first Star Wars live-action television series. Dave, what was that transition like for you as a director, as a producer, as a creator?
Yeah, it was interesting. Doing live action is something that hadn't really occurred to me until I started working with George Lucas on the Clone Wars. And because of the way he taught me to look at, movies and film and shooting and editing, it became something I was more and more interested in over the years working with him. He had us working on Clone Wars using a virtual production kind of method, where he had devised his own systems to, instead of doing storyboard drawings, we were virtually shooting on virtual sets and staging characters. And that was all a way that we could then edit animation with coverage and actual full length of shots. And so the language of it was very familiar to him. And then he was teaching me what he was looking for and why he would cut something. It was the first time where I'd ever really experienced, he's a brilliant editor and would move things around where you never thought they would fit, but he would just try it. He'd tell me we can always put it back, but once we move something, but we never would, because he's usually right. So he really piqued my interest. And then when Kathleen Kennedy came on board and started running Lucasfilm, I expressed to her an interest in it. And so that started kind of a long education and observation where she made it possible for me to visit the film sets on, the episode 7 and 8 and Rogue One, and talk to Gareth and JJ a bit about what they were doing. Rian Johnson, I got to say, was really instrumental for me as far as, just grabbing me and getting me right up next to the camera with him and the DP and blocking a scene. And, he was very supportive of my early efforts, because I'm the kind of person, if I show up on a big movie set, I just want to be invisible. I don't want to bother anybody. They have a lot to do. So, it's kind of...
to point out, in terms of invisibility, Dave actually has a cameo in The Mandalorian.
I do, yeah. Well, that was all. It's all part of the live action experience, right?
I would call it more than a cameo. I think.
Well, you
do.
Player. I know it's your favorite thing, but like Kathy pointed out.
Okay, Dave, I have to stop you. John, explain.
Well, we had. There's a point. I don't want to spoil it, but I guess at this point everybody's had an opportunity to see it. There's a point in one of the episodes where a squadron of X-Wings show up. And we wanted to have X-Wing pilots, and we were casting. And I realized that we had a group of great, very professional directors who I had watched over the course of filming have a tremendous confidence and a calm tone and everything you'd look for in a fighter pilot. Because honestly, they were dealing with a lot of innovative technology, and they were just directing and telling stories, and I think that's what I think about fighter pilots or pilots. They always have a calm voice and they're relaxed, and as emotional as a situation might be, as choppy as the weather might be, when the pilot gets on the intercom, they always sound very calming and soothing. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to have all of our directors pop in and become fighter pilots, and Dave is one of them. And so there's this great scene. It's a fun, I shouldn't say great, about a show I'm working on. There's a really exciting.
You great. Thank you.
There's a scene I enjoy a lot where the fighter pilots come in and they end up lighting up this illegal base, and a lot of big visual effects. But when you cut into the cockpit, you have all of our directors there. You got Deb Chow, you got Rick Famuyiwa, you got Dave in there. Just talking to each other in a most calm voice, cut against these really big Star Wars effects. And it was my favorite part. And I also liked it because the directors, especially for Dave, I came up as an actor. It's really interesting to sit there under the lights and have to deliver some lines and lay it out there. And it gives you, I think, empathy and a perspective on what performers go through, especially in this bigger than life circumstances. Because in Star Wars, you're usually in a costume or makeup, and things are blowing up around you, and yet you have to bring that humanity to it. And so it was really fun. But I genuinely liked their performances and liked their scenes in it, and it felt it felt not unlike the old original Star Wars movies we grew up with. When you see those pilots, it felt like something that could have been cracked out of a can from the 70s, and those dailies strung together in our show. So it's one of the most I got a kick out of.
That's got to be our next goal. We got to get him in the galaxy somewhere.
Oh yeah,
we'll find a spot for you.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, to pick up on John's point, Dave, that clearly throws you right into the live action world. Having been on both sides of the camera, and of course, Taika was on both sides of the camera, at least in terms of voiceover, for which he's nominated for, and the finale, for which he directed. You've got a few other big cameos. I understand a certain Luke Skywalker, Mr. Mark Hamill's voice shows up at one point. And of course, you've got amazing performances by the incredible Werner Herzog, Apollo Creed himself, Carl Weathers, and of course, they nominated Mr. Esposito for his role. For you, working with actors, and John, this is a question I have for you as well. Bringing actors into the Star Wars world is a massive thing. I've spoken to a number of actors over the years who participated in the movies, and they feel intimidated because they're walking in the shadow of Han Solo, to put it mildly. What would you guys do with your actors to get them kind of in the place you needed them to be, but also make them feel part of this world and this massive cultural phenomenon?
You've had more experience with this, Dave.
Yeah, always with Star Wars, it's like it has to be relatable. And even though it's this galaxy far, far away, I mean, it's the fact that everything in it is so relatable is the power of it. It's one of the really smart things that George did. And I used to relate the Star Wars universe to like people in my neighborhood growing up. You know, the guys with the car that we were always working on down the street were like Han Solo. You know, you had this relativity. So when I notice people are getting a little overwhelmed, you know, I'll always tell them, I was like, but this is just like any scenario. The character you're playing, like, for example, Amy Sedaris, I told her, you know, she didn't know a lot about Star Wars at all. And, you know, that could be, you know, intimidating. She's in the Mos Eisley hangar, you know, where the Millennium Falcon was. Like, people were reacting in all different ways that day when we were on Tatooine. But I was like, you know, ultimately you're just like more like a character from Taxi, the TV show, when you're in this, or, you know, you're a hustler. You give them relativity to our own world, whatever they're playing.
Well,
and
then I have to ask you, what did you say to Giancarlo?
Oh, I didn't actually have to direct him, but he seemed like he arrived ready-made. Like once you tell somebody they're going to get a lightsaber of some kind, that seems to calm their nerves and they're ready to go. So he was game from the beginning and just fantastic. You know, a lot of people, some people need a little bit of direction, but most people, our set, I thought everybody was really game and everybody's just excited to come and play on the sets and have a great time, you know, and be immersed in this. It's pretty immersive. And with the volume and the screens, when, you know, when he was standing on top of that TIE fighter looking out the horizon at the end of the season, he was really in it. He talked about it a little bit and what connecting with that imagery, you know, as opposed to if we just had all blue screen up there, he could see the vista. And that made a big difference.
That's important, because that reminds me of what Ludwig was talking about at the beginning. For all the technology that you guys worked with, and clearly there's a plethora of it, there's a very analog feel to this that made me, one of the things I loved about The Mandalorian is it reminded me of, I want to say the first Star Wars, but I guess episode 4 in the lineage, when I saw it as a kid for like the first of, I don't know, 8 million times. You know, it was that feeling of, yeah, they were flying along Tatooine, but the sand and the dirt and people had crap under their fingernails. It felt real. John, how important was that to you in crafting this series? Because, of course, you knew there was a lot of spotlight on you, but it felt like you wanted something very intimate as well as something grand.
Yeah, I felt that way strongly because there was already, Star Wars already had the big spectacle because the films had gone on. They were up to the 9th episode, and it was a space opera. And it was big with big visual effects, and the stories grow over time. So they usually start small with a few characters, and then the implications echo out over the years as the stakes become higher and higher. This was an opportunity to prune everything back to the beginnings again. And having new characters allowed us to do that. We weren't continuing anything. We were paying tribute to what had been established in the old films. And also, you know, part of it was drawing inspiration from what George Lucas originally drew inspiration from for Star Wars, for A New Hope, which was the samurai film, which was the Western, which was the old Flash Gordon series, World War II films. And so when we did research and when we had discussions with the various directors and department heads, we would put up the same reference that George would put up for his crew originally. And what's really mind-blowing, honestly, is that here it was so, there's so much to trying to create that authenticity to make it feel akin to what George had done. And then you realize that George was doing it without a roadmap. Mm-hmm. We have Star Wars to look back at. We could say, make it a little bit more like the monster from, you know, the Phantom Menace, or make it look more like, you know, we have reference points.
And of course, the audience have that too. So when you have a scene,
that's right,
like when Mando goes and meets with Carl Weathers, you kind of are like, oh, we're about to go. It's the cantina. Like you have a placement in all this. Even the setup of the story being kind of at that period between the fall of the Empire. Like there's roadmaps for us, as you put it.
But we're DJs. You know what I mean? You know. We're playing Beatles songs. He's the Beatles. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So, and the trick is, how do you recombine that? And that's, I think, also relates to what Ludwig does so well, because he, having seen Ludwig work on, like, you know, everybody, he had just come off of Black Panther, but also in Creed, you got to realize that was a situation where right up there with Star Wars is Rocky, as far as like iconic themes from the 70s that are baked into our memories. And to have a way to create a freshness while still being respectful of what came before, I think is one of the challenges of storytellers and musicians in this moment, because we're so inundated with so much content and so much music. Everything's available to somebody. It's not like when we were growing up, where if you didn't catch it in the theater or see it on television, later on they had VCRs. But now everything's at the touch of a finger. So everybody has a tremendous cultural context and could freeze frame, play it again, go pause it, look at the other film, see how it relates. Everybody's checking your work, and everybody's.
And John, I have a question for both you and Dave, and Ludwig as well. And Ludwig, you hinted to this when you told us about when you first let the guys hear the theme song. Of course, part of the element of people now watching The Mandalorian on Disney Plus in today's world is a lot of people are watching it on their phone. You guys came out of working in big theaters, or your work on a massive screen or in a massive sound system. I'm sure, Ludwig, you want people to hear the score on perfectly toned speakers. But the world we live in is that world. How does that change? And this is for all of you, actually. Does that change the way you tell stories, or the way you make films, or the way you make music, Ludwig?
Not for me in particular. Like I kind of treated every episode like a film. Of course there's an overall arc through the score and obviously through the story, but like every episode is, to me, was so different to itself, and that's what also was so fun. And for me especially, like, you can give it every episode its own theme, and its own instrumentation, and its own, every episode visually looks so differently. The colors, there's different actors, so if you can make the music kind of fit with that as well, it gives it, it makes it extra special. And for me, I just treated every episode like I would with a movie.
I remember when Mandalorian first dropped, I remember watching the first episode on my television and then watching the second episode. I'll be honest with you, I watched it on my phone partially. And John, does that factor into the process that you guys were doing as you were making this?
Yeah, I think we have to take all of that into account. I mean, the good news is when we first came out, we screened it in the theater, and it looked great. It stands up to it. I would say that, having watched most of my stuff start off on the big screen and then cycle down to some sort of home viewing, you realize that the vast majority of times it's being watched on a device or on a television. Even for the biggest blockbusters I've been involved with, you see it a couple times or once in the theater, and then you go back and watch it. And what we're very grateful for is the hardware and the technologies associated with the new hardware is so precise compared to the old days of doing color timing photochemically and striking prints and hoping that the theaters had the right type of sound system and the right type of projection system. There's pluses and minuses to it. You can't compete with the communal experience of being in the theater together. And movies is where I began, and it's what won my heart and made me want to do what I'm doing. But I have to say that the technology is getting so good that we know that when we finish, because we're doing it for season 2 now, when we finish and we put the image and we encode it and we put it out there, and we know if they're looking at it at a certain level of device, they're going to get the perfect version of the image. Now, it might be small, or it might be on their TV at home. And maybe they do both. Maybe they get to watch it when they're commuting. You know what I mean? And you're on the subway and you can watch something like that. I think it's great. I watch most stuff on an iPad, or on my TV at home. And I say, we understand what it is. There's, it's a different thing. And that's part of why the length of it, I think, works well, because people can watch it in one sitting and watch it again and again. I think it's hard when you have.
I plead guilty to that.
Yeah. But I think that's what it is now. I think people are they're so efficient with their time that they choose what they want to do when they want to do it. And you're really competing with so many other things. Again, when we were growing up, there's a movie, a couple movies came out every week. You went to the movie theater. There was television. There was a few networks. There was prime time. You had tens of millions of people watching programming together. Now you could pick out anything you want from any era. And how many shows are being made? I think there's
But having said that, John, the most in-demand show on the new streaming services. I just want to say, guys, Mandalorian you exceeded everybody's expectations. I want to ask you about season 2, but we got to wrap up for time. So I'm just going to say clearly, John's teased us a little bit. We will find out more, and you will see more on Deadline. John, Dave, Ludwig, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for bringing us The Mandalorian.
And thanks. And by the way, thanks to everybody. This was a really unexpected, delightful surprise to have so much recognition at the level of that people were noticing and acknowledging the work of all those people who worked so hard on it. And this means the world to us. So we're tremendously grateful for it. And we just want to say that if this is as far as it all goes, we just want to say that even getting to here has been really, really wonderful. And thanks for watching the show and allowing us to tell more stories.
Well, with that, my friends, may the force be with you. Thanks so much for joining us, guys.